Hi, welcome to Fresh Faces New Ideas. What you're about to watch is a clip from my live stream that I do on Twitch at twitch.tv/freshfacesnewideas. If you like what you're about to see, please like and subscribe here. Please go to my Twitch at the above address and subscribe there, or you can follow me on Twitter at FacesIdeas. Now, this clip is just a small part of my live streams that I do every day of the week. If you want more information, you can go to any of the above places that I've said, either the live stream or on my Twitter. But after that, you should enjoy this video, like and subscribe, and I hope to see more of you. One of the states that is arguing for banning critical race theory. Now, Texas just released the legislative agenda for their special session. What crazy stuff's of CRT? Because we're going to go over the things that they're saying about CRT. And now, I want to be very clear. I'm not a critical race theorist. I have not read all of the books about everything about critical race theory. But I know enough by simply Googling what critical race theory is to know that they're arguing lunacy. Now, also, I want to be clear on some other things. When I refer to critical race theory, the thing I'm referring to is what critical race theory, by its definition, is. Critical race theory is something that's taught at a graduate level to law students to discuss how the effect of race has shaped our laws. That's what critical race theory is. Critical race theory is, and I'm going to be clear about this, this is also not good if it's being taught in certain places. Critical race theory is not teaching you that whiteness is bad, that black people are forever victims, that you should forever be guilty of white guilt, or things like that. These are not things that critical race theory teaches because it's not critical race theory. What do you mean by talk about race so much? Because just because this is a thing that is covered by the news doesn't mean the schools are talking about it. In fact, the schools don't talk about race enough. The things like the Tulsa massacre need to be covered more. Things like the gasoline showers at the borders in the 20s that were then used as, because you have to understand history. That's why you should bring up what race is, because it influences history. If you don't want to learn history, then you don't want to understand things, because it encompasses our country. History is real, and race is an impact on it. That's like saying, why do we teach about the Jim Crow laws? Why do we teach about Martin Luther King? Why do we teach about any of these things? There's things. How is CRT being played out? What do you mean by that? Because there's a difference between the academic definition of CRT and the lunacy that's being argued about it. Now, the things that I was mentioning prior to this about because he does find some things in this, Christopher, he finds some specific examples of things. Those things should not be taught either. But they are not critical race theory. The reason you conflate them with critical race theory, or he does, and we will look at his own words on this, is because they're making it a catch-all. As for the Texas thing that I wanted to get back to is, the reason they are, one of the things that Texas is not covering in the 11-point legislative issues is their power grid, which both can't sustain people in the cold and can't sustain people in the heat. Seems like a problem to me, especially when it was something like 700 Texans died because they froze to death. But you got to go. First off, we're not trying to teach history different. You're just wrong on that. That's not what history is. We are currently teaching history different. Did you learn? See, again, CRT does not teach history the way you're arguing for. You are just wrong. I'm sorry. We're going to go over what CRT is, and it's not teaching history different. Critical theory looks at how things are and evaluates them based on certain lenses. Critical race theory looks at it through race. There are other theories that look at it through different ways. But again, it's not being taught to children. The things that are being conflated to critical race theory to children are not critical race theory. They're just an amalgamation of all the things that the right is using to make big, scary buzzwords to scare people. So, Greg Abbott signed into a law bill last week that restricts how current events in American history of racism can be taught in Texas schools. It is commonly referred to as critical race theory, although the term critical race theory never appears into it. Abbott says more than just was done to abolish critical race theory in Texas. So, like I originally said, I am not a critical race theorist expert. But from what I can understand, the things that I see are wrong. Can you show me where they say this? Because if you actually look into the defund the police movement, like the actual activists who are arguing for it, the slogan is different than the thing. Critical race theory is, again, just being taught in graduate levels. And is looking at how race affects laws. Okay, so this is where it's important. Meanwhile, the debate has taken a hold across the nation. Last year, conservative activist Christopher... Yes, but it is not a critical race theorist. What do you mean? Can we see what they teach the... Okay, but again, where do you see... That's what I'm specifically asking for. You're saying that defund the police is part of critical race theory. But critical race theory has been around since the 70s. Do you not... Well, what... Just if you're having a theory that's questioning something, it would obviously be good to look into certain things to fix it. But again, what I'm asking for you is to show me direct evidence of what you're talking about. Oh, another thing, for all of those of you who are new, I'm going to be setting up like merch and stuff soon. So, what people want in like quotes or slogans and stuff that we want on the merch, we'll put polls and stuff out about that. So for at least colleges, you get a curriculum. If you don't know what the curriculum is, you can go to a board meeting and ask that person. Or, and I know this is a crazy thing to say, if you have a child, talk to your child. You don't need a camera to watch them. But you should know, you should be able to figure this out without big government putting cameras in there to watch everything. So we're going to talk about Christopher Russo again. Publicly to denounce anti-racist education efforts. Since then, conservative lawmakers, commentators, and parents have raised the alarm that critical race theory is being used to teach children that they are racist and the U.S. is a racist country with irredeemable roots. Those who study the discipline say the attacks have nothing to do with critical race theory, but instead are targeting any teaching that challenges and complicates dominative narratives with the country's history and identity. We saw that in the other thing. What is critical race theory? Critical race theory... Now, let's look again who wrote this. This is the Texas Tribune. Critical race theory is a discipline, analytical tool, and approach that emerged in the 1970s and 80s. Scholars took up the ways radical inequity persisted even after a set of landmark civil rights laws and anti-discrimination laws had passed. During the civil rights movement, Daniel Hosang, professor of ethnicity, that's not, first off, teaching, you're talking about, what's his face? Matt Kendricks, right? So, this is going to be a little spoiler for one of the things that he says later. Yes, Matt Kendricks is not a critical race theorist at all. He's a historian. At least that's my understanding. Or he's an author. A professor of history. Obviously, and I said this, That's wrong. That's not something we should be teaching our kids. But it is not critical race theory. So when you combine things like Christopher Russo will do in this video, saying that Ibram X. Kendi is a critical race theorist, what he's doing is he's taking a scary phrase, a phrase that he started, literally started him, and tried to conflate it with topics it has nothing to do with to scare people. And the goal of that is to stop thought that they don't like. The reason they don't talk about this stuff is because a lot of it is fringe. Even the things he's going to talk about is fringe. But there's a difference. Because I've not looked into all of his history, I have not seen all the things that he has said. But I've said this. It is obvious that nobody should be teaching kids they're guilty of being white. The fact that you're going to construe that with critical race theory is disingenuous. You can have an issue with one thing, but if you conflate it with something completely different, you're being disingenuous, and that's the issue. We're in agreement on that first part, right? That teaching kids they're guilty of being white is bad. We can agree on that. But we've also can agree that has nothing to do with critical race theory, and arguing that they're the same is dishonest. One key concept in critical theory is racial formation. Developed by sociologists Michael Omi and Howard Winnett, the theory rejects the idea that race, black, white, Asian, is a fixed category that has always meant the same thing. This is objectively true because the idea of whiteness has expanded. You can be mixed race, but depending on how pale you are, you can be considered white. A perfect example of this, I don't know how many people you know this, but Hassan Piker is Turkish. But if I didn't tell you that and you just saw a picture of him, I can just, hold on. Are you telling me just looking at this picture, this person is Turkish? He looks like a white guy, but he's not. So this idea that whiteness hasn't expanded is factually correct. The idea of Asian Americans has expanded. It encompasses dozens of races: Vietnamese, Chinese, people from Laos, just all of those continents. They're just considered Asian Americans. John Oliver did a really good piece talking about this. Hold on one second. So there's a lot more here. The goal, well, we're looking at this, some of the key concepts. That's not what I meant to do. That's also not what I meant to hit. So this is, the scholars and writers are asking, what is it that racial inequality endures and persists even after decades after the laws have passed? Why is racism still enduring, and how we contribute to abolish it? It encourages us to move past superficial explanations that are given about equality and suffering and ask for new kinds of explanations. So it seems to be getting rid of slavery, or of racism. One key concept in critical race theory is racial formation. Instead, it traces the way that race has been defined, understood, and constructed in different ways throughout history. Define race as unstable and decentered, a complex of social meanings constantly being transformed by political struggles. That's correct. For example, they write the U.S. racial category of black was created as slavery was established and evolved. Africans who... Right, that is the academic goal. But again, you keep talking about something else. What is the phrase that you use? Hold on. Let me put, what is... The answer. You can't get rid of it. Well, you can't, but you can teach it. You can look at how it has affected society. So let's see, what are the other things? They talk about the term Mexican, how the Mexican has changed. Okay, I hope you find that. Omnimaniac. We know race is not a socially constructed thanks to DNA. Race is a social construct. No, so look, this is also Omnimaniac. This is also a false comparison. Nobody is arguing that everyone has to be the same. They're arguing they should be treated as equal under the law. This is one of the things of equality versus equality that they push for. But is critical race theory being taught K through 12? Nobody in K through Nobody in K through 12 is teaching critical race theory. If I tried to walk in and teach critical race theory, my kids would give me a blank stare on their face. So this is not being it. Now we have to talk about Christopher Rufo, and we'll have about an hour to cover him, and I hope that's enough time. So who is this guy? Identified a 36-year-old Gig Harbor political activist named Christopher as the architect of the campaign against critical race theory that has kept conservative media boiling at fever pitch. He's basically just like this troll. Critical race theory is the perfect foil for all the things conservatives hate about mainstream liberalism. We need new language for these issues. Walswell said, Rufo told them, political correctness is a dated term. Exactly. So it is a socialist, and that's what one of the things they were talking about is racial reformation. Is our idea of what is white is constantly evolving. We need new languages, so other frames are wrong too. Cancel culture is a vacuous term and doesn't translate to political program. Woke is a good epithet, but it's too broad, terminal, and easily brushed aside. Critical race theory is the perfect villain. This is him saying this. And then this Twitter quote we're going to show you. So this is the Twitter quote. This is why I call Christopher Rufo the Andy No of critical race theory, because he sees critical race theory everywhere, just like Andy No sees Antifas everywhere. Now, here he's talking to what's this? James Lindsay. Critical race theory is falling. Its end, but not the end, is looming. He says, I agree with you. The activists are realizing that their ideas, once put into practice, are generating discontent. Their racial coalition is also breaking apart. Asian Americans in particular are revolting against CRT, which punishes them more than any other group. Okay, but again, first off, when people say, I want to be very clear on a point here. Hold on, let me scroll back to something else just so I can have a better reading and give a fair argument to what you just said. I think making a bigger deal about race than we need to will have a negative impact. When some people feel forced to care about all the crap in CRT, we'll have a lot of backlash. People in America don't like being told how to think or what to say. Now, this is true and false. Once again, you are missing the main point of what I'm trying to argue. The main point of what I'm arguing here is not that critical race theory is good or critical race theory is bad. What I'm arguing here is that critical race theory as it's being presented is not critical race theory. If you don't want to learn about how race has affected our history, that's fine. You don't have to understand all the concepts and you can kind of be ignorant. But that's not what it is. Again, people have been saying backlash like this. Ben Shapiro keeps arguing this as well. This backlash that these people are arguing for is the minority. And Americans love being told how to think or what to say. They just have to be fed it in a different, less direct way. There's a reason why you hear parroted... No, I'm not wrong. There's a reason you hear parroted talking points like... That is the crux of what I've been arguing, is that they are making CRT a boogeyman on purpose to deny the history that they are trying to hide. Americans will be told to think whatever they want. How many people argue that Medicare for all is socialism and lead us to Venezuela? Why do they argue that? Because they're parroting talking points. The reason let us I want to make a quick description here. The left doesn't make it easy for the right to weaponize anything. What happens is the right has a vast media network that allows them to create propaganda out of thin air and then send it to millions of voices along vast channels so they can make something a bigger issue than it actually is. Remember the death panels when they were arguing against Obamacare? What they're currently advocating for is going back to actual death panels. There's a reason you hear people argue talking points like the vaccine will kill you, because Tucker Carlson said it, and it trickled down from there. There is no such thing as not being a racist. Everyone has some implicit biases. But the reason they don't argue against it is because it's not a big deal. There's proof of what? I'm sorry, AOS40. I had a long diatribe to you, so I just, when you just write there's proof, I don't know what exactly you're referring to. But the reason, the fact that the right is infatuated with critical race theory at this moment is a distraction from the fact that there is no actual policy prescriptions coming from the right, and they don't actually want to do anything to help the regular American people. So they're generating culture war issues in order to hide that fact. That's why. I don't give a shit what Tucker Carlson says, because 90% of it is fucking lies. People are dying from the... Wait, hold on. Let's be clear about something before you say that. Because when you say people are dying from the vaccine, are you referring to the actual vaccine killing them, or people who have been vaccinated then dying from natural causes? There's a difference. Anyway, let's go back to Christopher Rufo, because this is the point that I want to make. And this is the point that is most salient. Hold on. Let's get to the point where we can actually teach history as it happened before we start dealing with the crazy stuff. Let's go to a world where we can teach that the Civil War was mostly fought over slavery. That 8% of students don't know this. Let's go to a world where the number one fundraiser in the Congress for the Republican Party doesn't understand that wearing a mask doesn't make you the same as having as being a Jew during Nazi Germany. Let's get to a level where we can just agree on basic facts about actual history before we start worrying about that other stuff. I think that's a fair argument. Let's get to a baseline of understanding before we deal with the crazy. This is the quote that encompasses everything this man is arguing about. We have successfully frozen their brand. Critical race theory in the public into the public conversation and is steadily driving up negative perception. We will eventually turn it toxic, and we will put all the various cultural insanities under that brand category. That's all you need to know. He's not actually arguing for a point. They're going to make critical race theory a thing that they're ill-defining on purpose, bad, so they can throw all this other stuff under critical race theory. They did the same thing with socialism. You want to help the vets? Socialism. You want to give people Medicare? Socialism. You want to help give people housing? Socialism. Well, I'm sorry that you do that. Let's see, what is this? This is him going on Tucker Carlson. This has nothing to do with anything. No, because here's Charlie Kirk advocating for... If Charlie Kirk is advocating for something, you know it's stupid. I don't know what this Lego thing is, but we'll get to the critical race thing. People dying... Yeah, do you happen to know who those people who are dying are? They're fucking old people. So again, I have to ask you a question. Do you also believe that the FBI was part of January 6th? Because you're taking a unknown factor and you're equating it to a known factor. That doesn't work that way. So let's take a look at this
Critical race theory is everywhere. It's rapidly becoming the new orthodoxy in America's public institutions, and yet most Americans...
Okay. Do you believe it because of Tucker Carlson's argument about unindicted co-conspirators? Also, do you believe COVID is real?
have no idea where it comes from and what kind of society...
The origins of critical race theory.
Let's start at the beginning, with a short history of Marxism. Traditionally, the Marxist left has built its political program on the theory of class conflict. Marx believed that the primary mechanism of power in society was the relationship between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. The solution to this conflict, according to Marx, was revolution. He believed the proletariat would eventually gain consciousness of its plight, seize the means of production, and usher in a new socialist society.
This is accurate.
Over the course of the 20th century, a number of regimes attempted Marxist revolution, and all of them ended in disaster. The social...
Okay. All right, first off. North Korea is not a Marxist regime. It is a dictatorship. I assume he's referring to Pol Pot. That was also a dictatorship. These, I'm going to guess, had a lot of outside factors. The Soviet Union did attempt to be Marxist. And China is currently, they say they're communists. Cuba has also been thriving under an embargo. So there's a lot more to this. This is like saying that Venezuela collapsed because of healthcare.
Countries racked up a body count of nearly 100 million.
So they use this statistic all the time, and I'm not going to argue directly with this statistic. Okay, so you base a lot of your information without evidence. They don't ever talk about capitalism and the impact it has on people. We have, just for example, we will lose 600,000 people between 2019 and 2020, or 2020 and 2030 by not switching to Medicare for all, but people dying from lack of healthcare. 600,000 people. Just off of lack of healthcare. That's not counting people who starve. I don't know which we're referring to. So there's a lot of data that he's misconstruing.
Sent to the gulags, murdered in the streets, or starved to death due to the failure of socialist agricultural policy. Marx envisioned the new man who would transcend
we don't
the
actually need
limitations
to look at,
of the industrial world, but in practice his ideas unleashed.
This. All right, so here is Enter critical
This
race
is
theory.
where critical race theory comes in. Critical race theory is an academic discipline that came to fruition in the 1990s, building
So
on the
he starts off with this incorrect. The first sentence about critical race theory, he is already wrong. We looked at this. The origins of critical race theory start in the 70s and the 80s, not the 90s. So he's a decade to 2 decades late, just off the bat.
intellectual framework of critical theory and identity politics. Sometimes it's directly labeled critical race theory, but it's usually deployed under a series of euphemisms, such as equity, social justice, diversity and inclusion, and culturally responsive teaching.
Now, remember what I showed you to begin with. These, by conflating all these things, let's take a look at some of these things, because he's going to say these things are bad.
Building on the intellectual framework of critical theory and identity politics. Sometimes it's directly labeled critical race theory, but it's usually deployed under a series of euphemisms, such as
Let's look at what equity means. Equity, the quality of being fair and impartial. The quality of being fair and impartial is now Marxist.
equity, social justice, diversity and inclusion.
This is the other thing. I don't understand. They keep complaining. This is like Tim Pool level lunacy. If you don't know what I'm referring to, there was a memo sent out by the U.S. military about having a diversity and inclusion. I don't remember if it was a seminar, if it was just like a memo. It was just basically a memo saying, hey, we're going to try to be more diverse and inclusion. And from this memo, Tim Pool declared that the U.S. military is falling down. What law isn't fair? How about life imprisonment for marijuana? Things like that. But that's not what I'm not arguing about a specific law. He's going to say all of these things are bad.
And culturally responsive teaching. This is deliberate. The critical race theorists are masters of language construction and realize that neo-Marxism would be a hard sell to the American public. But equity is soft, persuasive, non-threatening, and easily confused with the
What did Trump agree with?
American principle of equality. But the distinction between these two words, equality and equity, is vast and crucially important. Equality is the idea that was first proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence, consecrated in blood during the Civil War, and codified into law.
Let's also acknowledge that the equality, all men are created equal, under the Declaration of Independence is a lie. The Declaration of Independence, he got one person out. And you know what he could have done? And this Biden could have done this too. He could have, as president, unilaterally. What? Well, I know what you're referring to. How? Unilaterally ended the ability for marijuana to be a Schedule I drug. Joe Biden could do the same thing. He hasn't done it. And the all men are created equal. The Declaration of Independence was written in 1776. When did slavery end? When did women get rights? When did black people get rights? It wasn't then. So this idea that already we're saying our document is all men are created equal, that framing at that time is a lie.
With the 14th and 15th Amendments, and the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of the mid-1960s. But the critical race theorists explicitly reject this vision, arguing that equality under the law is camouflage for white supremacy, patriarchy, and naked racial oppression.
They do not.
In their academic work, they've directly attacked the principles of non-discrimination, colorblindness, individual rights, private property, school integration, freedom of speech.
Let's look at these things. Non-discrimination is good. Colorblindness is bad. Individual rights is good. Private property depends on how Marxist you're going to be. School integration, something Republicans were against. And Joe Biden to some extent too. But he's basically a Republican. freedom of speech. Republicans are currently against freedom of speech.
And meritocracy. The critical race theorist would replace the system of equality with a system of equity.
You can be proud of how look. Republicans use this talking point all the time. You can be proud of where you have come, as well as recognize where you have come from.
Which represent diametrically opposed philosophies. Whereas equality seeks to protect individual rights regardless of race, equity seeks to divide the world into competing races.
Now, here is his argument for equality versus equity. We just looked at what equity means. According to him, equity, which means, let's pull it up again, just so I can get the framing right. History, equity. Quality of being fair and impartial. That's the dictionary definition of it. Right. Like, here's the thing. There's certain things pride should be used for. Pride of your country by just being born there, like white pride, you shouldn't have pride for being white. You didn't do anything to earn it. If there's a reason gay pride is something that happened, because the fact of being gay was villainized for so long that being proud of being gay is fine. What's your point? I'm well aware of that. Do you know we also kidnapped a whole fuck ton of them? This is, what he's saying right here is just nonsense. Spread it forward, happy
Racial groups.
Being gay is only special because there's a subsection of people currently still existing right. Hold on, let me I'll get to your point, Peter Parker, in a second. The only reason gay pride is an acceptable thing is because there's a group of people who think that those people shouldn't exist. So therefore they are proud, and they had to be hidden, and they were considered lower and lesser class. The previous vice president was part of advocating for gay conversion therapies. This is not very long ago that this type of shit was happening. Gay marriage, although it is considered modern day now, is only like 6 to 8 years old. Again, your points don't have anything to do with anything. We kill gays too. There was actually conservative politicians who were running on the idea that we need to be a theocracy and we need to ban gay marriage and make it. George W. Bush ran arguing for an amendment to make gays marriage illegal as an amendment to the Constitution. And yes, I agree, this idea of equality of outcome is not something we should strive for.
And ensure race-based equality of outcomes, endorsing active racial discrimination to get there. In a foundational paper called Whiteness as Property, the critical race theorist Cheryl Harris has proposed suspending private property rights, seizing land and wealth from the rich, and redistributing it along racial lines.
Now, two things here. I actually did look up Cheryl Harris. She is actually a critical race theorist. Suspend private property rights. This is something a socialist or Marxist would argue for. Seize land and wealth from the rich. We should have higher wealth tax. That's good. Race-based retribution, I'm not a fan of. So two of these three things are based.
The critical race guru Ibram Kendi has
critical race guru. Now, we sort of jumped the gun on this. Peter Parker brought this point up, but Ibram Kendi is not a critical race theorist at all.
Proposed the creation of a Department of Anti-Racism with the power to nullify, veto, or abolish any law at any level of government and silence the speech of political leaders and intellectuals.
This, as far as I can tell, is just a flat-out lie. This is the only thing I could find when I was looking through Ibram Kendi about any type of idea of a Department of Anti-Racism. Now, Peter Parker, I know you're looking into this. If you can find me what the fuck he's talking about here, because he's going to say something even wackier about it. No, you don't understand anything. I understand exactly how good it is, but I can also look. I don't need to look at this country through rose-colored glasses. I want to make this country better. I want to make sure that thousands of people don't lose their lives to lack of health care. That thousands of people don't go bankrupt because they got sick. That's fine. It's fine that you didn't find that. I'm telling you, I've looked for this and I cannot find it. You need to look at the reality of the planet. Just because the country is the greatest country in the world, even though we don't give people health care, we have terrible... we're not even... All right, Luhan, are you British? Yeah, for what exactly category are we best in? Are we best in the fact that we lock up more people than anyone else? The fact that we have less healthcare than any developed nation in the world? Like, just because these things exist, this idea that America is the greatest country ever, doesn't mean that you can't make it better. So as far as I can tell, this is straight bullshit. It would establish and permanently fund the Department of Anti-Racism, comprised of formally trained experts on racial and not political appointees. The DOA would be responsible for pre-clearing all local, state, and federal public policies to ensure they won't yield racial inequalities, monitor these policies, investigate private racist policies when racial inequalities surface, and monitor public officials for expression of racial ideas. Now, this is not what he says. This is not what that said. So basically what this would be is similar to what the civil rights had. No, it's a catch-all for people who don't want to actually deal with the reality. So what this would do is similar to what the Civil Rights Act used to have. It used to have this thing called Article 5. What was Article 5? Article 5 said that if a state, certain states, it was 13 states, with a history of passing racial laws, passed a law about voting, they had to pre-clear it with the DOJ or the federal government. And the reason they had to do this is because they were making things that were specifically targeting racial people. When that was rolled back by the Supreme Court, those type of laws exploded. What this looks like is an expansion of that. Now, this idea of monitoring public officials for expression of racist ideas, I'm not a huge fan of. I'm not a fan of this last part. Okay? So, he's misconstruing what's happening here. But this part is an outright lie.
Anti-racist. The new department would be unaccountable to voters, the executive, or the legislature. In other words, it would become an all-powerful fourth branch of government and mean the end of the federalist system.
This is just straight horseshit. That is just not true on any level.
Finally, like the critical theorists before them, the critical race theorists would abolish the economic system of capitalism and replace it with an economic system of collectivism.
I couldn't find any data to say that either. It's possible I mixed it. I missed it, but I could not find that.
According to Kendi, in order to truly be anti-racist, you also have to truly be anti-capitalist.
That is also partly true because capitalism has expanded racism.
Identity is the means, Marxism is the end, same as it ever was. So how does this ideology translate into real-world practice? For the first 2 decades, critical race theory remained an obscure field of inquiry, relegated to academic journals and universities.
Now, let me ask you this. Critical race theory, before this year, have you ever heard that term? Because I didn't. And the reason you didn't hear that term is because it was only taught in law schools. That's why.
City campuses. But today, critical race theory is quickly becoming the default ideology of our public institutions. It's spread from the universities to government agencies, public school systems, teacher training programs, and even corporate HR departments. It's been transformed from a series of academic
Prior to last year?
concepts
Because that's
into
last year's when he started this.
diversity training programs, corporate compliance modules, public policy frameworks, and public school.
So this is his claim. All of these things now have... What do you mean, why do we have to care about that?
Curricula. Last year, I conducted a series of reports focused on agencies of the federal.
What is petty? That understanding that we built a system of inequality and looking at it objectively? I don't understand. What are you saying?
Government. I discovered that the FBI was holding workshops on intersectionality theory. The Department of Homeland Security was telling white employees they were committing.
Oh, Jesus. My dude. Are you, like, listening to the things that I'm saying? What is intersectionality theory? Because it's not critical race theory. Also, this is not critical race theory either. This is fucking stupid. Like microaggressions and shit, I just don't understand.
Micro inequities and had been socialized into oppressor roles.
This is also stupid things to be arguing, and it's not critical race theory.
Finally, the Sandia National Laboratories, which designs America's nuclear arsenal, sent white male executives to a 3-day re-education camp, telling them that white male culture was analogous to the KKK, white supremacists.
Now, they use this analogy a lot, these re-education camps, and a lot of times they use it with... I just haven't looked at what intersectionality theory is. But is it critical race theory? And having it being taught in the Department of Justice, is that a problem? I wonder if he's going to bring up Robin
Mass
DeAngelo.
killings. This year, I finished another series of reports focused on critical race theory in education. The stories are shocking. In Cupertino, California, an elementary...
Yeah, the anti-racist... So look, if they're doing anti-racism training, and a lot of this has to do with Robin DeAngelo's right fragility, that shit is bull. That is just dog shit. Anyone who understands it knows that it is bullshit. Except for people who want to fearmonger about it. The white fragility stuff is nonsense.
School forced third graders to deconstruct their racial and sexual identities, then rank themselves according to their power and privilege. In Springfield, Missouri, a middle school forced teachers to locate themselves on an oppression matrix.
Again, these things are not critical race theory. They're just really dumb.
Telling straight, white, English-speaking Christian males they were members of the oppressor class and must atone for their covert white supremacy. In Philadelphia, an elementary school forced fifth graders to celebrate black communism and simulate a black power rally.
This is something that you're going to hear a lot from conservatives when they talk about MLK, but something they don't want to talk about is Martin Luther King was a socialist. So when they say we're doing Martin Luther King's dream, they don't actually mean that.
To free Angela Davis from prison, where she had once been held on charges of murder. And finally, in Seattle, the school district told white teachers they were guilty of spirit murder against black children and must bankrupt.
Spirit. Like, some of these things are just so fucking dumb. Like, we can all agree the idea of spirit murder is just dumb as shit. The only... The reason we don't point out that this stuff is dumb. Well, they're okay, so I'm going to have to call you a little here because I'm still very tiny, so I don't know how much content you've been exposed to outside of me. But there are absolutely people, larger people than me, who talk about this. I know for a fact that Vosh has talked about this a couple times, and he's like 700,000 times bigger than I am. The fact that they're making a big deal out of this proves that they have no argument, because these are small issues that they're blowing up into bigger points.
Their privilege in acknowledgement of their thieved inheritance. This is a revolutionary change. In the previous century, state institutions were presented as neutral, technocratic, and oriented towards broadly held perceptions of the public good. This is no longer the case. Our institutions are being radicalized by critical race theory, and the levers of state power are being turned against the American people.
He gave no example of the levels of state power being turned against the American people, because they're not for this purpose. There are absolutely levels of state power being turned against the American people. It's one of the perfect examples is the Patriot Act.
With no sign of slowing down. Here's the problem. Thus far, Americans of good faith have been unable to resist critical race theories blitzed through.
Okay, but the examples of all the example of all white people are racist. When you see that, where do you get these things? Like, is it being advocated for on like high levels? This is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about it in not being a mainstream zeitgeist, that it's not a fundamental talking point. Well, that's literally what Tucker is arguing.
There are four main reasons for this. First, most Americans have developed an acute fear of speaking about sensitive social.
This is the same thing as people coming out again. They're afraid to come out as conservatives. The reason people don't. No. He's not. Spread it forward. Generally, you're pretty on point. He's making a different argument. His argument is, and if I'm wrong about this, he can correct me. His argument is that because some of these, well, I appreciate the fact that you've recognized that. His argument is that some of these existence of people saying things like all white people are racist exist, and I've obviously said that this is stupid, things like that. But I don't think that they deserve the hoopla that they're receiving. What he's advocating for is that we should stamp down the stupid before it spreads. Right? He's kind of quoting. He's quoting me. I called it a small issue. That's what he's saying. I called it a small issue because I don't think it is a massive spread of things that we need to worry about.
And political issues.
Oh, and the reason they don't want to talk about this is the same reason nobody like your drunk conservative uncle that nobody likes, is because they're going to say some racist ass shit. They're going to say some social and politically racist ass shit or crazy shit. That's why they don't want to talk about it.
Especially race. According to a recent Gallup poll, 52% of liberals, 64% of moderates, and 77% of conservatives are scared to share their political beliefs.
Look, this is just dumb. If you can articulate what your beliefs are in a way that makes you sound intelligent, or where you have a good argument, and you're willing to listen to the counterpoint of your argument, you should be able to have a conversation about politics. This is literally what I do for hopefully a living. If if people want to join the Discord, if you want to subscribe, if you want to donate some bits, then we can start making some money and then expand things like that. But I will be building on that over the next couple of days, assuming my internet ever works.
In public. They're afraid to get mobbed on social media, fired from their job, or berated by the institutions. So they simply remain quiet, which cedes the territory to the most intolerant voices who can dominate the public conversation.
Yeah, communists and socialists have a hysterically high... Exactly. And why? Because they get fucking murdered.
And install their ideology.
Look, there is no bigger set of snowflakes than conservative men. Conservatives as a whole are very snowflakes. But conservative men are the biggest snowflakes because they whine about all this dumb shit.
In the country's schools, government agencies, and corporations. And consequently, these institutions become monocultures, dogmatic, intolerant, suspicious, and hostile to a diversity of beliefs. The Equity and Inclusion Department is
Nope, that's not what he just told us. We're told that's bad.
established in the name of a social good, but in practice serves as a political office, enforcing the new orthodoxy and punishing any dissent. Second, the critical race theorists have constructed their argument like a mousetrap. They claim that
Yeah. This idea that the Trump supporters are a silent majority is just true. It's just wrong. Trump supporters don't shut the fuck up. Like, at all. They're constantly complaining.
any disagreement with their program is simply evidence of the dissenters' white fragility, unconscious bias, or internalized white supremacy. They project this idea.
All right, man. Thank you for joining us. Tomorrow we'll be back at 1 p.m. Assuming I have internet, but we'll see.
They transform principled disagreement into evidence of guilt. I've seen this play out dozens of times in my reporting. Diversity trainers will make an outrageous claim.
Look at this fucking depiction of a diversity trainer. This is if this was colored, this would be a blue hair SJW.
As all whites are intrinsically oppressors, or white teachers are guilty of spirit murdering black children, and then flat out refuse to consider any evidence to the contrary.
Hold on. What is the evidence to the contrary of white teachers are guilty of spirit murdering black children? What is the evidence for that?
White teachers are guilty.
Spirit murder of black children. House schools are spirit murdering black and brown. This is gonna be some dumb shit that I'm gonna laugh at. Okay, these all look like actual, assaults. This is nonsense. Spirit murder is nonsense. Anyone who uses the phrase spirit murder is a lunatic. Anyone who uses spirit murder in any type of argument has no credibility.
And then flat out refuse to consider any evidence to the contrary. If they're confronted, they'll adopt a tone of patronizing concern and explain that participants are feeling white denial and reacting.
Wait a minute. Is this different than Republicans arguing that that America's not the greatest country ever, there's actual issues with it, is different? It means that you should leave? Or that you hate America? How is this different?
Guilt and shame. The dissenters are instructed to remain silent, lean into the discomfort, and accept their complicity in white supremacy. Thus, the mousetrap is shut and the program continues without interruption. Third, many liberals, moderates, and conservatives have failed to separate critical race theory's premise from its conclusion. The premise of critical race theory is quite simple. America has a history of slavery, racism, and injustice, and we should examine the relationship between racism, power, and society. This is undoubtedly true.
Now, this statement
race theory is quite simple.
Puts him at odds with Ben Shapiro.
America has a history of slavery, racism, and injustice, and we should examine the relationship between racism, power, and society. This is undoubtedly true. Nobody taking an honest look at American history could deny it. But the critical race theorist's conclusion that the American regime is irredeemably racist and must be overthrown through moral, political, and economic revolution.
I haven't been able to find this to prove it.
Is false.
And it is possible I just haven't looked at it. So chat, I don't know how many of you still left here. A couple of you. If somebody can find that conclusion and prove me wrong.
The critical race theorists use their premise as a bludgeon, bullying people into accepting their conclusions. This is dishonest and manipulative. It's entirely logical and moral to accept the premise that the United States has a history of racial injustice, and even that residual racism is still a pernicious force.
See, this second statement is the issue. JS Bay, how are you doing? There's people who still argue this. Ben Shapiro.
American society, but
What are we waiting for?
reject the critical race theorist political program, which, as we've seen, is little more than repackaged 1960s-style Marxism. Finally,
he's saying that critical race theory has the correct to this
history of racial injustice, and even that residual racism is
this. I mean, these are objectively true. Obviously, you can't argue that these points are wrong. His whole argument is critical race theory is very expansive, but this is not critical race theory.
still a pernicious force in American society, but reject the critical race theorist political program, which, as we've seen, is little more than repackaged 1960s-style Marxism. Finally, the writers and activists who've had the courage to speak out against critical race theory have often fought on purely theoretical terms, pointing out critical race theory's flaws.
The reason that they would do this is because critical race theory is still a theoretical thing, because it's a theory.
Internal contradictions, and bad history. These are all worthy criticisms, but they move the debate into the realm of the academic and the abstract, which is friendly terrain for the critical race theorists and absolves them from grappling with the practical and tangible consequences of their philosophy.
Wait, why? Why would... that doesn't make any sense. Why would having a theory be in the abstract and the theological be an advantage for them when you're trying to debunk it? Wouldn't you be on even ground then?
We shouldn't challenge the critical race theorists to debate the finer points of Marx and Marcuse. We must confront them with the
Black Lives
reality
Matter
that they're creating. Do they support schools separating third graders into oppressor and oppressed?
This is stupid because it's not.
Do they support a curriculum teaching that all white people perpetuate systemic racism? Do they support schools instructing white parents to become white traitors and advocate for white abolition? Do they believe that counter-genocide is a...
Now, I don't have to tell you, because I assume you all have 4 brain cells and have been paying attention long enough to know that all of these things are bad, and none of these things are critical race theory.
Solution to America's problems. These are all real-world examples from my investigative reporting, and a better challenge to critical race theory than 1,000 academic papers. The real test for the critical race theorists is not to defend their ideas as abstractions, but to defend the real-world impact of their ideas.
All right, so since we're going to be ending in 20 minutes, I want to get to this Joy Reid clip. Now, I don't tend to watch a lot of Joy Reid, but she does a really good job here.
You say that Ibram Kendi, Dr. Ibram Kendi, who's a
now what she's referring to him is this thing that we just watched. That's what they're discussing.
Professor, you call him the guru of critical race theory. So we reached out to him. I've interviewed him before. So we reached out to him because you say he's the guru of critical race theory. You name him a lot in a lot of your, both in your manifesto or your talking points memo, but also in your video. We reached out to him. We asked him if he's a critical race theorist. He said, I admire critical race theory, but I don't identify as a critical race theorist. I'm not a legal scholar, so I wasn't trained on critical race theory. I'm a historian. And Chris would know this if he actually read my work or understood that critical race theory is taught in law schools. I didn't attend law school, which is where...
Remember, he only pointed out 2 people for critical race theory. So half of his ideas about the people about critical race theory, and the one he focused on was Ibram X. Kendi. It was on this Department of Anti-Racism and how it's is overarching evil 4th branch of government. It's just a lie.
Critical race theory is taught. It's really the only place it's taught. NBC has looked into everywhere, and it's not taught in elementary school. But hold on a second. This is the second thing he said, which is strange to me that you...
Let me respond. This is not a monologue. This should be a dialogue, right? Am I right?
It's my show, so it's how I want to do it. So let me...
what she's saying is first is just setting this up.
Read you one more quote from him, because you've made a lot of claims about critical race theory saying that white Americans are inherently racist, that racism is inherent to whiteness. And that is one of the core charges that you're making about, these sort of what you consider like sort of woke studies in school. This is what Ibram Kendi has said in his own words. He said, we've been taught that racist is essential to who a person is. It's a fixed category. It's in someone's heart. That's one of the reasons why people are unwilling to or unable to admit the times in which they're being racist, because it's not just admitting I was being racist in that moment. Basically, we're tattooing racist on our forehead for the rest of our lives. Isn't that the opposite of what you're arguing?
Well, I'll say two things. First of all, it's very interesting to me that so many people are now running away from the race of the label of critical race theory. But
he's not a critical race theorist.
Hold on. I'm going to quote two critical race theorists. Barbara Applebaum with the book Being Good, Being White. She says, quote, all white people are racist. Robin DiAngelo, who's another...
Robin DiAngelo is also not a critical race theorist.
Critical whiteness studies scholar says that, quote,
nope.
all white identity is inherently racist. So what you're doing is you're playing a series of word games. You know that critical...
This is literally what he's doing. Of the people he has mentioned, 50% of them are not critical race theorists. And I missed the first one. I don't care to look up whether he's wrong about that one.
Studies is a subfield of critical race theory.
No, it's not.
These things are all deeply interrelated.
No, they're not.
And I'm not going to let you play word games. And this is really, I think, the most essential thing.
Hold on. No.
Let me respond at least once. I haven't gotten a full sentence out.
Because I'm not going to let you see. One of the things that, and I don't know, you probably never watched me on TV. Just we didn't know who each other were, not so long ago. But I don't allow people to just make up and say lies on the show. It's just not really right to do that and let people hear. But hold on.
But
Robin DiAngelo.
Wait. Am I right
Robin
or wrong?
DiAngelo is not a critical race theorist, and I want everyone to know that. Robin DiAngelo, I don't know who the other woman is, but she's not. But let's just go through a minute, because whiteness, and racist. Whiteness and racist.
Sure.
Where did the term whiteness come from?
Sure, and I think this is an important point, and I hope you let me actually get a full paragraph out about this.
Go for it.
Whiteness is the idea that there is some kind of metaphysical category in the world, that all white people are reducible to this essence of whiteness. Then what happens is that they load all of these negative connotations. They say that whiteness is by definition, that includes white fragility, includes white privilege, includes internalized white superiority. And then what they do is they try to impose these reductive racial categories onto individuals. And I actually agree with Kendi's approach. I think that we should fight race essentialism. But the problem is that critical race theory enshrines race essentialism.
But you
see it in schools. And I'll give you three examples of critical race theory being taught in schools.
Hold on one second.
In Cupertino, California.
In your talking points, sir. Chris, these are in your talking points, and I know what you're going to say because you said it with Mark Lamont Hill. You repeat these same things. They're in this manifesto. People can read it online. Let me just go for a second. On the subject of whiteness, are you aware, since you say that I guess you're sort of a quasi-historian in your thinking, that whiteness was actually formed in the United States? That whiteness didn't even exist as a thing. Europeans were all European. They considered themselves Italian or Polish or whatever. When the colonists came here, they actually created the idea of whiteness. This is from the Smithsonian.
I agree with that.
As a way to distinguish themselves from what they call the savages, the natives, and from black people, from Africans, who even if you had a little African in you, if you're Plessy, who's 7/8 white, if you are African in any aspect, that you are reduced of rights. So people that you don't like, that are doing this sort of wokeness training, are saying whiteness has always had power. There used to be a saying, I'm free, white, and 18. It was commonly said in the 50s and 60s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. So whiteness has power. So people who want to decouple whiteness from power, that's what you're annoyed by, right? Let me play a little bit of what you said. You did a speech.
No. All she's doing is quoting his words at him.
Hold on. You did a speech at the Claremont Institute in which you talked a little bit about how you really feel about the academics of it. Here it is. This is cut. I think this is it 3? Yeah, go for it. Play it.
I'm a white guy fighting critical race theory.
Do you identify as white?
I'm an Italian American, so you tell me. Lumping people into white, black, Asian, as you suggested, is such a crude.
He's also part of the Manhattan Institute, which is kind of similar to these like federal societies, like right-wing think tanks type of stuff.
Broad categorization.
There's these like very kind of pathetic and very angry graduate students that try to fight me on these highly technical Hegel interpretations, and it's like I don't have time for this. I don't give a about this stuff.
So you don't give an S about this stuff. You're really just having a campaign to take everything that annoys white Americans and white conservatives.
No, that's not right.
You want to make a campaign campaign and stuff
give-
everything
you
in
played
there.
my
that
highlight
people
reel.
annoy-
You played my
people that
highlight
get
reel. Give me a
annoyed,
chance to respond.
And you
No,
want
that's
to
absolutely
stuff
wrong.
it all into critical race theory, right?
What I don't think is right is that forcing 8-year-olds in Cupertino, California to deconstruct their racial identities
That's
and then
not
rank
critical race
themselves
theory.
according to power and privilege. It's intersectionality theory, which was invented by
That's
Kimberly Crenshaw.
intersectionality. It's a separate thing.
Which is part
Intersectionality
of
is a
critical
separate
race
thing.
theory.
No, it's
You-
not, dear.
you had her on your
It's not.
show. You know
She's
this.
Yeah, she
And
invented
here's
both
the bottom
things.
line, Joy.
She
What
invented
you've
both
done
things.
in tonight's segment
She's
is
in-
exactly what
one
I'm
more
fighting
thing.
against. I'm fighting
No.
against the manipulation of language. I'm fighting
Right,
against language
you're fighting against
deconstruction.
wokeness, and you
I'm
don't
trying
like
to basically
corporate
load
wokeness.
all of
Look,
that.
we don't need to watch the rest of this. This guy is a fraud. He is the what's it called? The Andy No of critical race theory. That's all there is to it. That's who he is. When you hear this term critical race theory, you have to understand what the people pushing this are trying to do. They're trying to take this idea of I guess it's anti-racism and just construe it in the worst possible way to make it as dumb as physically possible. He's just full of shit. Now, let's see. We got a little bit left. We got about 15 minutes. So, hi. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe, and then head over to Twitch, twitch.tv/freshfacesnewideas, where you can follow me there and help support the channel. If you also like what I do, please follow me on Twitter @FacesIdeas. I hope to see more of you, and I hope you enjoy the content. Thank you very much.